Except for a little evening discussion is Mr. Yaron Brook. He's the executive director, as many of you know, of the Ayn Rand Institute in Southern California. And as I said, we have lots of Rand books right here in this library. He's an internationally renowned speaker among the world's greatest advocates for the morality of capitalism and the immorality of statism. He was a socialist until the age of 16 when he read Atlas Shrugged. That's right, he read Atlas Shrugged. It changed a lot of minds, including his own. It was a journey of enlightenment that many have taken, but few have done more good with that knowledge than the man to my left. His writings are widely published in leading newspapers in the world. He's one of the leading authorities on Rand's philosophy of objectivism, and he's here today to talk about losing freedom in America. I'm sure it'll be cheerier than the title suggests. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Yaron Brook.
I'm going to stand at the side of the podium. Yeah. It's like, ah. So I have to shift the camera now. Thank you. And it's always a pleasure to be here at Heartland, and everything you said about Heartland, absolutely true. I personally love the work that they do, particularly on climate change, although, of course, you know, you'd expect people to be skeptical of climate change living in Chicago. You know, you guys probably want global warming, right? I mean, if only a few degrees were increased. I mean, it's us in California who are struggling. No, this is probably one of the biggest issues of our day. It's certainly one of the avenues in which statists have chosen to pursue their anti-freedom, anti-technology, anti-progress, anti-capitalist avenues, right? Is through the environmental movement in particular, through this bogus notion of climate change, right? As if climate never changed. You know, this is great, the work that you guys do, and I encourage you all to get involved with Heartland. So this is my third talk today, so I'm kind of mellowed out. I just came from a debate, which was interesting. And I thought we'd, and this is very much a last minute thing, so thank you again to Heartland for facilitating this. I thought we'd talk politics, right? Because the world is nutty out there. And it's, I don't know what the latest news is, but I'm assuming the Republicans are going to cave any minute now, right? And cut a deal to get this over with. So I thought we'd talk a little bit about how we got into the condition that we are today. And I'm not going to talk a lot, so I thought we'd really open this up and have like a conversation, and I'll take questions, and we'll do it that way. I don't think there are many people here I need to convince of anything. It looks like I'm pretty much among friends. So I'll just give you a sense of my take on what's going on in Washington, D.C. right now, why we got into this, why we're in this mess, kind of in a broader perspective, and then just let's open it up and see what you guys want to talk about. And I'm always game for whatever people want to discuss. The fundamental problem, you know, in American politics is that we have lost all sense of principle. There's no sense of what the role of government really should be. There's no political party today in Washington that represents a principled position around limited government. And I'm not even talking about kind of a libertarian or an objectivist perspective of limited government. Any limited government, any limits of government. You know, so the Republican Party sold its soul to the statist agenda decades ago. And what we're seeing today is the consequence of that. We're seeing two political parties, both with statist agendas, one that wants to move to the left fast and one that wants to move to the left slow. But that's really the only fundamental difference between these two parties. Now, I have a preference for slow over fast. I think we all do, because slow gives us time maybe to have an impact on the culture and stop the move to the left, to the move to greater statism, and shift other direction. But fundamentally, there is no political party that represents the founding principles of this country. There are no, with a few exceptions that I mention in a minute, there are no political figures, no substantial political figures over the last decades that have stood for the founding principles of this country. And when you get a political figure like Barry Goldwater, he gets defeated in a landslide because he is close to being principled, and the country's not ready for that. And then you have a political figure like Ronald Reagan, who's a little bit watered down from Barry Goldwater, right? Who can get elected, but then can't do anything because nobody else agrees with any of these principles, and nothing really happens. And he gives a great speech, but he doesn't really execute on it. And then once he's out of the office, everything goes back to the same as it was, right? Government continues to grow at an ever-growing rate. So we have two political parties that are statist, and of course the reason for that is that we have a population that is statist. I mean, it's a mistake for us to believe that somehow all that's needed is some great politician to come about and the country will rally around him and everything is fantastic. The fact is that we have a population that doesn't know what the founding principles of this country are, that has no sense of what individual rights, qua negative rights, qua the real definition of rights is. We have a population that's ignorant of history, that's ignorant of economics, and the country's drifting leftwards because the country is leftwards. The country's drifting leftwards, not just the politicians. The politicians are following the people, and they're very much caving in. I mean, even with Obamacare, all the polls show Obamacare is unpopular. But you know why it's unpopular? Because there's a certain fraction, some people hate it because it's bigger government. But there's a fraction of that hate it because it's not enough government. Because what they want is single-payer universal health care, and Obamacare doesn't give them that. It's too complicated. Right? They just want to go and get free health care, or free non-care, or whatever you want to call it, like the Canadians and the Europeans get. So it's not that there's a majority of the country who want a free market alternative to Obamacare. There isn't. There isn't. So what we're seeing today is the consequence of a country that has drifted dramatically leftward in its ideas, in its ideology. A country that is very much ignorant of the foundations of freedom and foundations of liberty. And this is why I still believe that the primary focus of any campaign for liberty has to be educational, has to be to educate people and change the culture, and the politics follows because the politics are reflecting that culture, and the culture's left. It's even among the Tea Party, right? So they're anti-Obamacare, but they will fight to the death for socialized medicine for anybody over 65. It's called Medicare, right? Most of them are over 65. Most of them are getting are recipients of this, and they will fight for it, right? So even the Tea Party, as much as energy as they have, and I'm a huge fan of the Tea Party, they need educating. They don't understand what liberty really means. They don't understand what freedom means. They don't understand what individual rights mean. And therefore they're completely inconsistent and all over the map, even on economic issues, which is their relative strength. Social issues is a disaster with them. So the political campaign is primarily, ultimately, a cultural educational campaign, and you cannot get around that fact. Now, we're in a period where, because of the Tea Party, we have some political leaders who I think are a little bit better on some issues that relate to rights, that relate to founding principles. Whether it's a Rand Paul or a Ted Cruz or Lee from Utah or Johnson from Wisconsin, they're somewhat better on the issues of economic rights. And they're fueled by a Tea Party movement that on certain issues is very adamant and very passionate and very engaged. Right? And you get quite a few House members that are the same way. And they've chosen this moment in time to kind of stand up against Obamacare. Now, where have they been for the last 3 years? I don't know. But really to stand up and to make this a big deal. And it's refreshing, I have to say. I enjoy Ted Cruz's pseudo-filibuster. I enjoy listening to them passionately advocate for this. It's fun to see politicians who actually are taking a stand on something, even though the political costs might be negative. To them, it might be hurtful. It's hard to tell. Republicans are not popular right now because of all this. And I think you're seeing a real challenge there. You're seeing a few politicians who have some principles, some, not as many as we would like, but some, You're seeing a majority of the Republican Party that's just traditional Republican Party. You have no clue about what a principle is, and they have no idea what Ted Cruz is talking about or what any of these guys are talking about, and they're just drifting along because these guys seem passionate and they get a lot of phone calls from Tea Party people, so they're just being dragged along, into the shutdown and into all this stuff. And you have a population that I think mostly is confused, as we said, relatively ignorant, doesn't really understand the issues. The Tea Party loves Ted Cruz, but for some good reasons, some not so good reasons. And it's just a mess. And the consequence that this is going to turn out to be a disaster for the Republicans, because there's no strategy here. There's emotion, there's passion, there's a little bit of standing on principle, but there's no strategy, and there's not enough people involved to make any kind of real difference. The few people who are willing to stand up are too few, and they will end up caving and get nothing in return. Or what they get in return, they'll play it up and they'll pretend that it's meaningful, but it'll be meaningless. I mean, the Senate compromise thing, I haven't seen if that was passed, and I haven't seen a final version of it, but the one thing they could have got, one of the most stupidest, dumbest things in Obamacare was this 3% tax on medical devices. I don't know if you know how familiar you are with it. It's 3% on revenue. It's not on profit. Basically, it takes out all the profit from these businesses that run on very slim margins anyway. And these are innovative, many of them are startups, right? And many of them don't have profits. And it's just the dumbest, stupidest idea ever. It's just because from every perspective, even from the perspective of somebody trying to maximize social utility or trying to do some social welfare stuff, it's just silly, right? These are companies that are creating great products, new products, innovative products, and you're destroying them. You're destroying them. And what's going to happen is the good companies are going to move overseas, because the fact is the Europeans regulate less and tax less innovative companies. So, why stay in the U.S.? The Republicans won't even get that. I mean, that's already out of the Senate bill, and even the House Republicans, I think, have given up on that one. So, and the most they would get is a postponement of it, not a complete rejection of it. So they've completely lost what they fought for. And this is a consequence of no real principle. So even Ted Cruz, right, he gives a great speech, and he pitched Atlas Shrugged during the speech. I have to respect him. I told everybody to go up and to buy a copy, so that's great. But this, to do something like this, shut down government for that cause, this Obamacare, you should have been advocating for this, speech after speech after speech for the last 2-3 years, right? Last year, Republicans ran a presidential candidate that couldn't talk about Obamacare because he invented it. It was called Romneycare. So it was nowhere in the debate last year, right? So people have just accepted Obamacare is going to happen. And suddenly, out of nowhere, it comes out. So from a PR perspective, from a strategy perspective, this whole thing makes absolutely no sense. And of course, the fact is Obama and the Democrats, control the Senate, they control the White House. What do the Republicans hope to get here? They're not going to win the PR battle because it's random. It's a principle out of nowhere. They haven't laid the foundations for it. They're not going to get anything from Obama because Obama has nothing to lose here. He's going to blame everything on the Republicans. I mean, I'm all for shutting down the government. Anytime you can shut down the government, it's a good thing, right? But you got to have good reasons to do it, right? Like, how about privatizing national parks? I mean, that should have been a big slogan of the Republicans. Once everybody was denied the national monuments and national parks, come out with a proposal to privatize them all. And that would solve the problem of people now being able to come in when the federal government has no money to run them. Propose something about the budget. So they don't want to raise the debt limit, right? But every budget proposal that they've proposed, that they put on the table, raises the debt limit. So they come across as hypocrites, right? Oh, we won't raise the debt limit, but do you have a budget proposal that won't raise the debt limit? No, we would also raise the debt limit, just we would raise it a little bit less than the Democrats. It's unconvincing, unprincipled, uninteresting, and from a PR perspective, it's a complete loser. So, they're gonna capitulate. The government will open. They'll raise the debt limit, and they've got nothing to show for it, or they will have nothing to show for it. So, at the end of the day, this was probably a strategic disaster for them, in spite of the fact that I was inspired by a few people standing up and saying their piece. They could have done it so much better. And the problem is, their unwillingness to define their principles. Because if they define their principles, they get into trouble. So even Ted Cruz, right? He could talk about Obamacare, but he would never mention Medicare, right? So what's the difference between Medicare and Obamacare? If you're against Obamacare, how can you be for Medicare? Medicare is just socialized medicine for 65-year-olds. What's the difference, right? So, and they know that. They know that if they strike an actual principle with regard to Obamacare, they actually stand on principle, they're going to be called out on Medicare. And they can't. Because, they fear that more than anything. I mean, Paul Ryan has a modest proposal about vouchers for Medicare, which is good, which is a step in the right direction. And he was vilified as a monster by the press and by the Democrats. And the public's not buying it. So, at the end of the day, while we've got better people in Washington on these economic issues, we've got some politicians that are actually making a much better case than has been in the past, it's still true that they cannot move anything forward as long as the American people are as ignorant and unconvinced as they are today. And I see no indication that they're engaging the kind of educational campaign that you would have to engage in order to change the American people's minds. One of the things I've been telling, I speak a lot in front of Tea Party groups and kind of conservative Republican groups. And one of the things I think that people need to start considering is that it might be impossible to save the Republican Party. It might be impossible to actually bring principles into the Republican Party, use that as an educational platform and an electoral platform. And it might necessitate starting a third party, that people should really think seriously about a third political party, partially because it'll be fresh, right? Remember you guys, some of you are too young, but what Ross Perot did, right? I mean, he was an uncharismatic, little short guy who was not articulate. He didn't do good television. He sat at the desk with flip charts and flipped them over, and he got 20% of the vote. He got 20% of the vote because he looked at the camera and he told the Americans, he showed them the numbers and he told them the truth. And he used it as an educational platform. He actually educated Americans about, in those days, deficits and debt, right? Things are 100 times worse than they were in the early 90s. So it would be, and that was fresh, right? It wasn't just a Republican partisan doing it. It wasn't a Democrat partisan. It was something new. It was something different. And I seriously think that to change what's going on now, you need a shock to the system. You need something new. You need something different. And a third party led by the right people, it needs to be big. It needs to be big names, and it has to have big money behind it. But the money, I think, is there if you get the right people. Is probably the right path. And again, they're not going to be objectivist, and they're not going to be libertarian. But if they're just more free market than what we have today, and more principled, at least in making some kind of attempt to connect to the founders and really talk to the American people about what the real problems are, present alternatives. I think it's the only shot we have long term to save this country from the disaster that is the two-party system that we have right now. So that's my assessment, kind of the politics of it. I don't see, unfortunately, I don't see a third party coming about. I think the people like Rand Paul and Ted Cruz and so on are too committed to the Republican Party to split off and do something interesting and exciting. And I don't see any major figure outside of politics who would take that on and really embrace it and can generate a national buzz in order to get something like that going. And I think our campaign needs to continue to be one of education, and one of education about the political foundations of this country. And more importantly, as probably many of you know, what we believe at the Institute is you're not going to really change things until there's a moral revolution, there's an ethical revolution in this country, until people are willing to reject the morality of selflessness and the morality of you are your brother's keeper, and your moral purpose in life is to serve others, and on, and to embrace an individualistic moral theory, and to embrace individualism, And that should really be, I think, our campaign is around individualism. And it's a hook to the founders who are clearly individualists. And it's a hook to moral foundations for individual rights and therefore moral foundations for limited government. So the struggle for individualism must continue. And this is it's going to be a long, drawn out campaign to resurrect the spirit of individualism in this country. The Tea Parties is just the beginning of that, but it's going to have to sustain itself over the next couple of decades. Because that's probably about the time we have in order to win this. So get energized. There's a lot of work to do, and there's a lot of educating to do, but that, at the end of the day, is what it's really about. Thank you all. Now, take questions on anything. Yep.
I have a question. So you mentioned education. All right, let's say you have 3 minutes to convince somebody that now has an open mind for 3 minutes. That's all you got.
Yeah.
What are you going to say to them? They've admitted they're not educated.
Yeah. I don't think you can do anything in 3 minutes. I mean, I think that's just the reality we live in. You can't do it in 3 minutes. If you can't get them to read a book, I mean, what I would do is pitch Atlas or pitch Fountainhead. Pitch them a book that has these ideas. But if people don't read, you're lost. Because these are hard ideas. This isn't easy. I mean, think about what the founding fathers had how much education they had to have in order to get to where they were. I mean, they read Locke, they read Montesquieu, they read Voltaire, they read and read and read, and they knew the stuff. And the culture at the time was fairly educated, the people who supported the founders. And if all you've got is 3 minutes, like if all you've got is a YouTube video, I mean, hopefully you've got more than one YouTube video, right? I mean, you can break this up into 3-minute chunks, but it has to be many 3 minutes. I mean, my pitch, the 3-minute pitch, is at the end of the day, is who do you think owns your life? Because that's what America's about. That's the question the founders answered, right? Before the founders, the answer's always been the tribe, the king, the Pope, somebody else, right? You don't own your life. And the founders, basically enlightenment says, no, your life is yours. And what does that mean? That means I need to be left free to live it as I see fit. And that's the moral foundation of freedom, right? It's the idea that my life is mine. Now, there's a whole philosophical reason why your life is yours and so on, but you can't give it. And in order to be able to live my life as I see fit, because only I can decide what's good for me. And I have the tool to make that decision, reason. And therefore, I needed to be left free in order to live that life, right? That's the abbreviated version. And the only political system that does that is a government that protects you from coercion and leaves you alone otherwise. So that would be my 3-minute spiel, but to pretend that you'd convince anybody with that, at least maybe you'd get them thinking and go read a book. Yeah, Keith?
I was going to say, speaking of 2-minute soundbites, can you relate the story about your 2-minute speech at the Tea Party rally in Washington?
Oh yeah, it's a good story. So this summer, we have an internship program at the Institute. We had 30 young people come in for like 3 weeks, to AOI, and they work and they study. Right? They're half a day they're studying and half a day they're working. And this year, this 17-year-old girl comes up to me and says, Dr. Brook, when I was 13, you changed my life. And I said, what? She said, so you guys remember the big Tea Party rally in 2009? It was in Washington, D.C. There were like hundreds of thousands of people there. It was huge. And I was one of the speakers. And I was relatively late in the day. And by the time they got to me, I had 2 minutes. That was all. And they were cutting people off using loud music. So you had no choice. You had 2 minutes and that was it. And it turns out that she was there with her family. She was 13. And the family was there, and they had spent the whole day there, and it was like, she's 13, this is boring stuff. And all these speeches and everything. So I went up there, and I gave a 2-minute spiel, and I can't remember what I said, but, something about, it's your life, you own it, it's yours to live as you see fit. And I said something like, This country won't change until we recognize that you are not your brother's keeper. And you could tell, everybody's cheering, and then I said, you are not your brother's keeper, and everybody went, what did he say? Because, like, the Tea Parties all believe in that, right? So it turns out that that is the only thing she remembered from that whole day. You are not your brother's keeper. That's it. Because it was controversial. It was nobody, she'd never heard it before. It was like, whoa, what is he talking about? This goes against everything I've learned, right? So she pondered it, and then, you know, as kids do today, Googled me, found out about Ayn Rand, got all the books, read all the books, got all the family to read the books, and now she's like an intern at the Ayn Rand Institute, right? And all because you go out there with a moral message, that should appeal to young people, because young people are looking for ideas, they're looking for what's right, they're looking for truth, they're looking for morality. And if you can stimulate those young people into thinking, then you've achieved it. But they still have to go research and read and do internships and stuff like that before you get them really committed. But that's the level at which you're gonna, you know, we have to find those open minds. You can't deal it just in politics, because it's meaningless. It has to be grounded in morality, and it's the moral case that has to be driven home, and we have to really fight for it. And at the end of the day, it's your moral right to live your life for yourself. Other questions? Anything?
Why don't you run?
So, my standard answer, I get questioned that a lot. My standard answer is the two-pronged. One, I don't have a Hawaiian birth certificate. I was born in Israel, and there's no way to hide that fact. Not to imply Obama is hiding anything. Second, I would lose in a landslide. The country's not ready. It's not ready. You know, as good of a rah-rah speaker as I am. You know, the first question on, you know, I got a question today on Medicare, right, from an audience member at the debates, and I said, it's immoral, it's wrong, it should be abolished, here's how you'd abolish it. And even people who were okay with me up until that point were like uncomfortable in their seats because, oh, he just said you should abolish Medicare and Social Security and Medicaid and everything else in the entitlement state. It's just, and I can't water that down. I mean, you can give a good argument for why you need to abolish it, but I'm not going to say, yeah, let's save Medicare. Right? And nobody in politics today says abolish it. Even the Rand Paul, even the Ted Cruz's are going to be big supporters of Medicare, and we need to defend it. Oh, we want to bring market incentives so we can save it, right? But that's a cop-out, because they're copping out on the morality of it. And once you cop out on the morality of it, you're not principled anymore, and you've lost. You've lost. Yeah, Jonathan?
You mentioned leading with the morality and emphasizing the morality of it. You know, whether it's a 2-minute speech or an hour-long speech, people would look at your ideals and say, these are extreme.
Yeah.
This is extreme, and that's used as a slur all the time. How do you, like, respond to that effectively, you know, in, as you said, a culture where, where the ideas that are congruent with the founders are seen as wacko and extreme?
Well, I mean, I embrace the fact that it's extreme. I don't fight it. Now, extreme is a package deal. It's not a real concept. It's used to slur you. It's not used to actually say. I like the word radical, so I try to rephrase it as radical rather than extreme. But we are radical. We're outside of the mainstream. We're fighting for ideas that are outside the mainstream, which is the definition of radical. But then I cook it up. I say, look, the Founding Fathers were radicals. The Founding Fathers were extreme for their day. Nobody agreed with the founders, and they had to fight a war to get where they wanted. And what were they fighting? What were they fighting against? If you read the Declaration of Independence, right? The beauty of the Declaration is not only does it articulate what government should be for, protection of individual rights, inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but then it articulates the reasons for revolution. They actually tell you why revolution is the only alternative, and they tell you what the king has done. All the different things. And you read it, and you say, oh, they're doing that today, they're doing that today, they're doing that today, they're doing, you know, you can check them off. And almost all of them, they're doing more than that today. They're much worse than King George. Today, our government is much worse than King George. Yeah, we can vote, who cares? when we're voting between two parties who are going to both violate our rights in a way King George could have never dreamt of violating his subjects' rights. So you got to explain to them how radical the founders were, and that, you know, being, you know, I love Goldwater's term, you know, was it being a,
Extremism
in defense of liberty is no vice, right? And that's true, and that's the point of view you need. You need to embrace the fact that we're radical and extreme, and then say, yes, we believe in freedom, we believe in individualism, we believe in people's right to pursue their own life. We're for happiness. I don't know what you're for, but I'm for happiness, right? You know, and that's extreme because most people want to see suffering in the world, and I don't. And I care for the poor, therefore I'm for capitalism. I care for the rich, therefore I'm for capitalism. You know, I mean, this is the thing that you have to be, that you need to emphasize. We come across as too, I mean, generally the pro-free market movement come across as too angry and dour and depressed and miserable and so on. We're about love and happiness. That's it. That's what our philosophy is. We are, you know, the 60s, right? That's who we really are, right? Ayn Rand's philosophy is a philosophy of love. Love of value, love of virtue, love of the good, love of success, love of your own life, love of yourself. This is the philosophy of love. And this is the philosophy of happiness, right? So we should be positive and engaged, and we should be talking about human potential and the upside and succeeding and what a capitalist world would look like and how much progress there would be made. You know, instead of focusing on how awful public education is, let's imagine what private education would look like. Oh, it's off the charts. It's so much better than what we have today. You can't even imagine how good it would be. Here's some examples. Da, da, da. We should be projecting a positive image of what markets and what morality is about. So it's that, you know, positive energy that we should be embracing, because that's what it's about. It's about life, right? This is the philosophy of life. Yeah.
You know, I want to ask you something, if you could be a little prophetic. A lot of the economists on the right are talking about this economic implosion. They're talking about it all the time. I mean, Peter Schiff particularly. And what do you think? I mean, you're an economist. What do you think?
So I know Peter, and you know,
I think he's fantastic.
Peter's fantastic,
Yeah,
and I love
but
Peter and everything. But you know, he's been talking about the economic implosion since '07. And to some extent, he predicted, I mean, to a large extent, he predicted 2008, but then he thought it would get much worse. He never saw it getting better. He thought Asia would do a lot better than the US, and it hasn't. So, you know, I'm a finance guy, and I've learned, because I'm an investor, I've learned that I'm good on trends, and I have no clue about timing.
That being good on trends is good.
You know, you try, you know, being short net bank when it goes from $40 to 250 and you lose $1 million in one day. You know, you could be right, because NetBank went to 4 and ultimately to 0. But when it went to 40 to 250, it wiped me out. So I wasn't there to enjoy it when it went to 0. It's you know, being right on trends is a start, but it's not enough. Look, nothing good is going to come from economic policy practice today in Washington D.C. The Fed is creating a disaster of historical proportions, because what they're doing has never been done before. They're engaged in an experiment that's never been done before. Now, what is the nature of that implosion? I don't know. It could be the kind of inflationary scenario that and a desertion of the dollar that Peter Schiff predicts. You know, I'm skeptical, because where are people going to go? I mean, it's not like the euro is safer. Just look at France. Just look at European countries. Just look at the liabilities that they face. Yeah, Germany is relatively healthy, but not in 20 years. Now with the unfunded liabilities they've taken on, right? Are they going to go to Chinese currency? Really? You really want to do that? I mean, do you know what the Chinese are doing right now? I mean, does anybody know what the economic numbers coming out of China really are? Right? When they build cities that nobody lives in, and then they claim GDP is at 9%, is that real? What, you know, nobody's gonna suddenly run to the Chinese currency. So what's going to replace the dollar? It's not clear. So I see, if there's going to be an implosion, this is where I differ from Peter, I think it's global. There's no safe haven.
Well, that's what's frightening. It does look like that's
There's
how it works.
no safe haven. There's no way to run. The United States is the center of the world. I'm very US-centric in that sense. I believe the economy of the world is tied to this country. Nobody's going to survive our implosion if we implode. So it's not clear to me what happens. Plus, I do think that if you see inflation, I think at some point they'll shut it down. And what happens when they shut down inflation? What happens to the economy? Well, we saw it in 81, 82 when Volcker shut down inflation, spiraled into a deep recession. So I think that, you know, there's a possibility that there's inflation that don't do anything. With Janet Yellen there, yeah, they might just let inflation get out of control, and you get this inflationary spiral, the dollar goes to hell, and you know, we have high inflation in the United States. It's also possible that we have a complete collapse of credit, that everybody tightens, nobody wants to borrow money, nobody wants to lend money, and we go into this prolonged depression. Nothing good can happen, but which one of those alternatives, you know, and it could be that we're lucky and there's a president in office when one of these happens that does it right, and you know, and we somehow survive these things. I've been pessimistic too many times and been proven wrong to go on this, the world is coming to an end. I lived in Israel in the early 1980s, and we had 1,500% inflation a year. 1,500% inflation a year. You got paid, you went and you bought stuff, because tomorrow it would be worth a lot less. Every day, the people in the grocery stores would change the prices. And in those days, you know, they weren't electronic. They literally had to change the prices, right? Every grocery store went around it every day, right? Prices changed on a daily basis. You know, we survived. I don't remember those days as like Depression era, depressing, horrible. I mean, I'm not for inflation. I'm just saying life didn't end. People didn't starve. Everything became indexed in the economy, so you actually didn't lose that much wealth unless you made really bad investments. The Israeli government at the time was actually liberalizing the economy, so it was reducing regulations and freeing up labor markets a little bit and doing the right kind of things. So Israel kind of came out of the inflation in better shape than when it entered it. Now, all I'm saying there is that you could have really bad stuff happen and the world still doesn't end. And the U.S. economy is the most productive economy in the world. I mean, this is, again, I disagree with Peter. Peter's very focused on material production. You know, who builds this podium? I mean, I care about who designed the podium, because that's where the real profit margin is. We design the podiums, even if the Chinese land up building them. But even if you look at pure productivity, we produce more stuff today than ever in American history. Our economy generates enormous amounts of wealth, real wealth, not pretend wealth. And now some of it's pretend because of the Fed policy. But there's a lot of real creation here. All you have to do is go to Silicon Valley and spend some time with entrepreneurs and see what kind of innovation is happening. This is still an innovative, entrepreneurial, productive economy. So we could escape from this with the right policies, right? If we deregulated, we could escape. And if you had the right politician at the right time, who knows? So I still think the high probability is some disaster, but I don't know what it is, some economic disaster. But there's a chance we avert it, and there's a chance that we go into the disaster and come out of it, okay. I think a lot of things could happen. And again, free will, people can change, people can vote differently, people can choose to be more productive, people can choose to be less productive. We could spiral out and become like Argentina. You know, Argentina, just a fun statistic, in the early 20th century, Argentina had a per capita GDP equal to the United States. So wealth and income in Argentina was the same as the US. Today it's like a quarter, right? So they during this, you know, they've grown a little bit, but we've grown like that. And that's all the consequences of politics. We could do that. You know, Japan hasn't grown in 24 years. Right? We could do that. We could have high inflation. I doubt that we would have hyperinflation, but we could have high inflation. You know, it's hard, again.
You know what the most important thing you said is it's not going to be the end of the world. Because when you listen to some of the economists, that's what it sounds like. So that's a good thing.
I don't buy the end of the world. And I look, you know, I travel a lot in the United States. I was just in Las Vegas, right? Thousands and thousands of people in the street. Gambling and stupid stuff, right? Throwing their money away. Eating at fancy restaurants that charge a lot of money. staying at expensive hotels. I look around California. California is supposedly an economic disaster, right? You'd think we were all starving in the streets. Restaurants are booming, people out shopping, things look great. Now, I'm not saying things are great, because a lot of this is bubble, a lot of this is fluff, and it's foam. And in California, yes, the upper middle class and the wealthy are doing very well. It's the very poor that are really suffering in California. Unemployment is higher than the national average. A lot of kids in the inner cities, it's a disaster. But you couldn't tell driving around. Crime rates at the lowest they've ever been in California.
That's because all the criminals have come to Chicago.
Yeah, I guess. But it's even Chicago, as bad as your crime wave has been in the last 2 years, it's much safer than it was 20 years ago. Look at the statistic. Chicago is the violent crime rates are much lower than they were in the 70s and 80s. So we lose perspective, right? We lose historical perspective. There's a huge amount of wealth in America. Huge amount of wealth. To dissipate the wealth that we have in this country is not going to happen with one. I just don't see it happening with one crash and it all goes to hell. It's going to take decades to dissipate this wealth. And again, there's innovation. You go to San Francisco, the most socialist city in the country. It makes Chicago look, hyper-capitalist, right? It's being run by the most leftist administration ever for decades. And one of the things you can see there is there are homeless people everywhere, and they thrive. The homeless people in San Francisco, nobody does anything to them, so they're everywhere, and they bug you, and they don't just stay to their own. They literally go after you, and they harass you. It's awful. And yet, San Francisco's booming. There's new construction there. Every time I go there are new buildings. There's new construction. It's clean. It's cleaner than it's ever been. Union Square, which used to be dumpy, is now all cleaned up and beautiful. There's a huge amount of wealth because Twitter's there and Facebook's there, and and people are innovating. People are creating. Now, we might say Twitter, Facebook, who cares? But people do care. People value it, and people are paying for it. So don't downplay. One of the things they do on the right is they downplay America. They downplay the innovative spirit. They downplay entrepreneurship. They downplay Americans. And the fact is, Americans are not ready to just give up and go home. And that's what would have to happen. You'd have to have such a crisis. Look at '08 and compare it to the Great Depression. And this is my point about the wealth. In the Great Depression, people were hungry. There were food lines. In the Great Depression, farmers left the farms and came into the cities because there was no hope for them to survive on the farm. People's lives were destroyed. Yeah, the Great Recession was tough. And partially it's because of all the socialist policies. Partially we smoothed this out, right? So nobody's hungry because we give them fruit stamps. So we smoothed it out. But yeah, we smoothed it out. So I guess it buys us time. I don't know. The fact is that I don't see a disaster, in spite of what's happening in DC. Now again, it's bad, particularly when you think of the potential, right? We're so productive and innovative. Think of what would happen if we were free. Wow, the innovation, the pace of innovation, the pace of wealth creation would accelerate dramatically. We could grow this economy at 5, 6, 7, 8% GDP growth. That's unimaginable today in a Western country, but that's because of the state interference. But it's hard to imagine what the quality of life would be if the U.S. economy was growing at 5, 6, 7, 8% GDP regular year after year. The wealth creation is just astronomical. It's science fiction. But that's what we're missing, and that needs to be an emphasis. If all we do is the end of the world is coming, doomsday tomorrow, it's a disaster, everybody's going to starve. Nobody wants stuff. You can get some kids in college excited, but then after 3, 4 years and they see it hasn't happened, they lose interest. And I think that's what happens, unfortunately, to many libertarian commentators. That was a long answer.
To what extent are you a 10th Amendment advocate, and residing in California, what do you think the state's role is in the lives of the citizens?
So I'm not a big state rights advocate. I don't believe states have rights. I only believe individuals have rights. And if my state violates my rights, that's as evil as if the federal government violates my rights, and it's as evil if my local government violates my rights. I'm about individual rights, and I believe part of the reason to have a federal government is to make sure that the states are not violating individual rights. And this is the whole debate about slavery. This is why I think the Civil War was necessary, and I disagree with many libertarians who are very much anti the Civil War, because the fact is that a whole chunk of the country was violating individual rights. And that's not acceptable under a constitution that's supposed to be protecting individual rights. That's what the federal government's job is to protect those rights. So I think that I don't view the solution as let's give all the responsibility for redistribution of wealth and regulation and everything to the states, and because it's a smaller unit, it'll be better. Or because there's competition among the states, it'll be better. There's no evidence to suggest that's true. Look at Europe. They're all a bunch of little states, and they all violate everybody else's rights nonstop, and nobody's moving from, like, I don't know, there's some movement towards Switzerland, right? So Switzerland's population is skyrocketing right now because people are moving in. But it's not massive immigration that's going to force the French to change their mind. And Depardieu picked up his bags and moved to Russia, of all places. I don't know if you remember Depardieu, the famous actor. Because tax rate, okay, so one guy left, who cares, right? California is one of the most onerous states in the country for entrepreneurs and for wealth creation. And yet people are moving in. Entrepreneurs and wealth creators are moving in. Some people are leaving, but not that many. Because the weather's good, because Stanford's there, because there's a networking effect. There are lots of reasons why people stay in California. The competition, I mean, it works at the margin, but it's not big enough of an incentive to really have an effect. And at the end of the day, you've given up the intellectual battle because you've said, oh, let's just have competition and see what happens. And once you give the intellectual battle, all the states will become statist. Nobody will stay free. So I believe that we have to fight for individual rights. And that means we have to fight them at the state, Churchill's old thing, fight them on the beaches, fight them. We have to fight them on the county level, you have to fight them at the state level, and you have to fight them at the federal level. And this is why it's such a big battle. I mean, in many ways, my rights are more violated by my county than they are by the federal government. I mean, I just did a little addition to my house, 177 square feet, into my backyard, right? So into my own property. I had, I think, 8 county inspections. For little hundreds of, they took concrete samples of a concrete floor. I mean, I'm a civil engineer in a previous life. And yeah, if you're building a multi-rise building, you want to take concrete samples because it matters. But a floor? On a private residence? By the state? I mean, if I, the owner, was worried about my contractor cheating me on the concrete, I could have hired an engineer to take a concrete sample. But what's the state got to do with this? So, that probably doubled my price of this edition. Just the county regulations probably doubled the price. So that upsets me as much as Obamacare. I mean, Obamacare more because healthcare is important, but it sucks. So we have to fight individual rights on every level.
Yesterday I heard part 2 of a debate between you and Leonard Peacock on
Yeah.
Immigration. How frequently do you have the opportunity to engage in debates with Leonard Peacock?
Well, not formal debates. This was the only one I've ever had formal debates. But I, Leonard and I get together socially on a regular basis. So we have and issues come up, and as I think Leonard mentions in the tape of that, we almost always agree. Or if we don't, we usually can convince each other very quickly. And look, he's the philosopher. So, when it comes to philosophy, I'm nothing, right? I mean, I'm not a philosopher. He's a philosopher. There's stuff I have no clue about that he knows a lot about. Almost always we agree. On immigration, we disagree. And it has got to do with with the level of risk he perceives immigration having to our lives right now, to how pessimistic he is about where we're heading very, very soon, right? And I'm not, as you see, I'm not as pessimistic, and I don't think this is going to be the factor that tips us over. I don't think allowing immigrants into the country is going to turn us faster into statism than not allowing immigrants into the country. And so It's really more of a disagreement about the assessment of where we are today and how desperate things are. How much of an emergency are we in? And now we disagree on, because he tends to be more pessimistic than I do. And that's been true for a long time, yeah.
And he said something interesting about, he brought up Bill Gates being a leftist, and he said like industrial creativity doesn't cause an individual to be more morally and philosophically correct. But I know like you've spoken to Silicon Valley entrepreneurs and a lot of businessmen. So how do they react to your talks and like what you're talking about with all the wealth in the country? I mean, it's something deceiving, right? Because we do hear all the time, oh, the country's in dire straits, the economy's terrible, but yet, if you look around, things don't look that bad.
Well, partially they don't look bad because we've got such an established base of wealth, which is not growing that fast right now. Now, one of the reasons the rich are getting richer faster than the poor is because the Federal Reserve is pumping money into the financial system, which is causing financial assets to go up in value. And who owns financial assets? The wealthy. And who's getting screwed? Savers who have their money in the checking account or in a saving account because interest rates are so damn low, artificially so by the Fed. So there's a certain element right now where you're seeing this wealth, bubble up to the surface because wealthy people are gaining more of it, I think somewhat artificially because of Fed policy. But there's a huge wealth base in this country. There's a huge foundation that it's not going to just disappear tomorrow of real wealth, of people accumulating real assets. Now again, if the dollar goes to worthless, then all of that wealth goes away, but I just don't see the dollar just going like that into nothing. But you had a question.
Yeah,
How do these entrepreneurs respond?
If you guys create all these wealth, do they see the danger in?
No, a lot of them see the danger but don't know what the solution is or don't accept the solution. Many of them are riddled by various forms of guilt. Most of it's driven by guilt. You see that in Silicon Valley, even among young engineers. But a lot of it is politically they hate the right because on social issues the right is so screwed up. So if you go to Silicon Valley, many of them vote Democratic because of gay marriage and abortion and just the hostility and the religiosity of the right, which they find offensive. So I wouldn't take the fact that they vote left as an indicator. But then they also vote for increasing taxes on their own taxes in California. So there has to be an element of guilt there, which I think is quite prevalent. Now you see that a lot with in the South, right? In successful businessmen in the South. They're driven by, a lot of it is driven by guilt. They're embarrassed by their wealth. They feel guilty about their wealth. And therefore they're not champions of capitalism. They might not be leftists, but they're not champions of freedom, complete free markets. And you see the same thing in Silicon Valley, unfortunately. It takes a different form, but it's the same thing. And then there's the educational system, which these kids are smart, right? But they're smart at math. And the history, social sciences, everything else they've taught is BS. And so I would say we should spend a lot of time in Silicon Valley because they're smart enough to get it, right? Or we just have to overcome the bad education that they've got, the bad facts that they've got, and they're smart enough to understand the principles. Atlas Shrugged is very popular in Silicon Valley, in spite of the way they vote and in spite of everything. Silicon Valley's that's a tough one because, the energy, the excitement, the productiveness, the innovation, the independence of mind, how smart they are, and yet when it comes to politics, they're so bad. That is probably, of all the regions in the country, that's the one I find the most challenging to figure out and to craft a proper message to get them on our side. But it's exciting because that's where you see the upside of this country. That's where you see the good stuff happening. And one of the big trends in Silicon Valley right now is private online education. Huge push with billions of dollars being invested right now in different platforms. From the Khan Academy, which has created a huge nonprofit, but has raised huge amounts of money to create curriculum for high schools online, which is, it's not ideal, but it's certainly superior to anything the kids are going to get in their public schools, to a lot of for-profit ventures that are focused on university education, high school education, pre-high school education. It's a really exciting educational field, might be a field that technology can really break through for us, break the gridlock, kind of not the gridlock, the control of the left over. Once you get online, kids can go anywhere. They can study anything. They can, so a lot of this battle would be won or lost online, and that's where the left is much. Unfortunately, they're better than us on that as well. We just need to get a lot better at it. Other questions? Everybody's shy tonight. Want to go home? Cool. Okay, one more.
How do you make these ideas palatable to people who are hearing them for the very first time? I'm having a lot of trouble, really discussing these issues and talking about freedom, talking about liberty, framing objectivist ideas, and really even talking about the Constitution. Somebody told me, if you don't like how we're changing the country, then you can move somewhere else.
I was told that in the debate today. Big part of the debate was this guy telling me that I could leave, I should leave, please leave. I mean, didn't he repeat that 7 times, how if I didn't like it here, I should leave? And I said, I thought the American way was to stay and change things. But he was not, I was violating the social contract somehow, and I had to go. Yeah, I mean, it's an art, and it's hard, because we're radical. And I was actually at an event last night, a cocktail party, and this woman came up to me, and within 3 minutes, she was walking away furious, right? It didn't take me long to completely piss her off. But she was running a non-for-profit in, Western Africa, helping little villages do whatever. And she said something about human happiness is dependent on giving all the science shows. It's scientific fact that the way to achieve happiness is to give to others. And I said, bullshit. That science is nonsense. What you're measuring is a chemical in the brain at a particular time after people have been educated and brainwashed into wanting to do certain things that might not be in their self-interest. That might generate some endorphins being pushed out, but that's not happiness. Happiness is not a chemical in the brain, and it's not momentary. Anyway, she didn't like that. I was being unscientific and dogmatic, and she walked away. I mean, you have to focus on their values, right? You have to focus on the positive. So you focus, as I said before, you focus on, it's your life. Don't you want to live it? Don't you want to make choices about it? Why do you want somebody else telling you how and what to do? It's your money. Why are you giving 40% of it to the government? Don't you want to buy things for your kids? Don't you want to take care of your kids? You want the government to take care of your kids?
How about when you're talking about these ideas with somebody who pays a negative income tax or,
Yeah, then why do you want to be a parasite? I mean, you have to say it nicer than that. But one of the things that's parasitical. I mean, they're a parasite. They're living off of other people. And does that make you feel good that you're living off of other people? And what you have to appeal to them is this, is you have to hook them on the idea that happiness depends on self-esteem. Self-esteem depends on, on having challenges, achieving things, and knowing that you can take care of yourself. If you live at the expense of other people, you will never have self-esteem and you will never be happy. Entitlements destroy the people who get them. They destroy their ability to be successful. They destroy their ability to gain self-esteem. They destroy their ability, therefore, to be happy. So what you have to appeal to is their eagerness to be happy to the extent that they are. And you also have to recognize some people you can't get to. Most people you can't get to. And certainly most people over the age of 30 you can't get to. I mean, it's just, I used to be young a long time ago. And I used to argue with everybody, all the time, constantly. I used to yell a lot, right? That's where I developed this robust voice, right? Particularly my family, right? I was convinced that if I just showed them the light, they would see it and they would immediately convert, right? That was from 16 to 22, 23. At some point I realized this is a waste of time and I'm just destroying my relationships with people that I value. And I stopped. And then you have to pick your fights and pick your battles and really do a good job when you do it. But don't try to convince everybody, because you're not going to be successful. Pick and choose who you try to convince. But we should be going after the negative income tax people, telling them that A, isn't their ambition, if they're ambitious, why do they need to depend on other people? Why are they living off of other people? Why is it right for them to take my money? I earned it. Why is it theirs somehow? Why everybody agrees stealing's bad. How is this different than stealing? But it's hard, because these ideas go against the grain. I mean, we need to appreciate how radical we are. We're very, very, very radical. Not a little bit, very. Many varies.
I can't understand why these ideas are met by so much skepticism. The very first time I heard you speak, it was in one of those debates, probably like the David Cameron, if you guys were in Seattle, from Demos.
David Callahan.
Callahan,
Yeah.
right. And I went into that debate really rooting against you.
Seriously?
Yeah, I was, okay, this guy's gonna...
I'm going to use you in all my future talks. You just, you've just made my month.
And after 2 hours of merciless logic, I was like, holy shit, this guy is right. And everything just spiraled.
Well, this is why I do debates. Because in every group like that, there'll be one like you. But it's rare. It's rare that people think. It's rare that people look at reality, that they actually examine reality. It's a human fact that those characteristics are rare. Most people evade reality, and most people don't think. And particularly in a culture that encourages that, that is even more prevalent. So if we had a culture that celebrated thinking, that celebrated facts and logic, and then I think there'd be fewer people who kind of drifted. But most people today don't. They've got a certain notion of what their ideas should be, because they've been taught that by their parents or by their religion or by their whatever, and they just go with it, and they never challenge it, they never think about it. And when it is challenged, they become all defensive, because you're challenging everything they believed in, and they shut down, they don't think. So it's a tribute to you that you actually engage with the ideas, that you actually saw that there was something here interesting, and you followed up with it, right? And I can talk to an audience of 1,000 people, and there might be 1 or 2 or 3 people who respond that way, but that's what it's all about. That's why I do it. It's for the 1, 2, or 3 that respond. But that's the state of the culture we're in. Most people don't think. They really, I mean, it's hard to imagine, but they don't. And a lot of people, this is the other side of this, a lot of people hate. A lot of people are driven by hatred. And this is something that's hard for our side to understand. So you say, everybody knows Obamacare is going to fail, right? Everybody knows that the consequence of Obamacare is lower quality health care for pretty much everybody, particularly if you're middle class. The quality of health care is going to go down. Maybe a few people uninsured get better health care, but generally it's going to be low. Medical innovation is going to tumble. It's just going to be bad. Long term, this is bad. And you go, this isn't hard, right? To see this, because you can look at other countries. Their medical systems suck. They really do. They're bad. They come here to get quality health care. You look at 75% of all innovation in healthcare happens here. Why? Because we're still a little bit free. So why are they voting for this? Because they don't care. And it's hard for us to imagine that they don't care that your healthcare is going to get a lot worse. They actually like it. Or take an even more extreme case. Take the environmentalists, the global warming people, right? These guys at Heartland make an unbelievable case that what the IPCC and all these global people are saying is BS, right? And they've got the science to show it. They've got the everything. It's there, and it makes sense. I'm a scientist, and it just 15 years as we know warming, and the other side has no explanation for it, and all this stuff. And yet nothing matters to these other people. And it's not a few people. It's not like 2 or 3. So, these just 2, 3 evil people in the world, and they're so committed to this. It's thousands of people, thousands of scientists who really buy into this. And you say, they don't want to know. They don't want to think, right? They get their funding in order to support this hypothesis. All their friends support this hypothesis. They have blinders on. They don't even listen. You can't change their minds. Their whole self-esteem is tied up in this falsehood. And so many people are like that. And then some of them, the radicals, this is just a tool to destroy. They're true nihilists. they want to kill us. They just won't use a machine gun. They'll stop industrialization. They don't want industrialization. They don't want progress. They don't want technology to, and they hate. I think Obama's a hater. I think what motivates him is hate. I think the left generally, the radical left, is motivated by hatred, not by mistakes, not by lack of logic, but by emotion, and that emotion is hatred. So people like that, there's nothing to talk about. And my debate partners, David Callahan, the guy today, I'm not talking to them, right? There's no chance in hell. I mean, they built a whole career about being wrong. They're not going to change their minds suddenly, right? I'm talking to audience, right? To you. Right? And that's what you do debates for. So, but yeah, it's very frustrating to look at the world and see so many people who are just pig-headed about wrong ideas. Think about how long it took for somebody like, Galileo to get people to understand that the world, the universe is not centered around the Earth. Right? And that was quite a battle. And then he had Copernicus on his side. I mean, he had some firepower, right? And yet it took a long time.
I've noticed something besides that they don't think when you're dealing with someone that's really on the left, I don't know whether they think that they can create reality by lying, but
Yep.
there's a tremendous amount of lying, so that when you say that they're protecting their identity, you'll say a fact that's so obvious and it's so easy for them to check whether the fact is true, and they will lie. I mean, I've caught them in so many lies, and they're okay. It's the ends determine the means, so they can lie
It's called primacy of consciousness, philosophically, and it's what they teach at most universities today is the primacy of consciousness. You create reality, and it really hit home to me. You know when it hit home to me? With Bill Clinton, because Bill is when he asked what is, that was it. That's primacy of consciousness. The guy is lying and he doesn't even know. He doesn't know that lying's bad in some way. Lying is so ingrained in what he is and who he is that he can't avoid it. And he asks what is because that's what his college professors taught him. Well, what is that reality doesn't exist, right? Who was taught in college that reality exists? Not if you're a humanities student, right? Reality doesn't exist. You make it up. So what is this? And what is sex? Obviously, a blowjob's not sex. Why? Because I don't want it to be sex. And my wife is okay with it. So, I mean, Bill Clinton was the ultimate in that evasive, making up reality in your mind. Obama's different in that I think Obama's more ideological, an ideology of hatred. Whereas Bill Clinton was just about power. It was just about Bill Clinton having a good time, right? In a superficial, and that was mostly power lust. And you can see that most politicians are driven by power lust. Some are ideological nihilists, and Obama's like almost completely a nihilist, but I don't think he's quite way out there, but he's close. He's the most nihilistic president we've ever had. He's the most anti-American president in that sense that we've ever had. Yeah.
Do you really see entertainment as being an effective means of educating people as the message of objectivity?
Well, not so much entertainment, but art certainly. Aesthetics certainly. And here, of course, the main tool that we have is Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead and We the Living and Anthem, which are all novels, right? And most of you, I assume, are here because of the novels, right? So, entertainment is very superficial. And, yes, when it's a massive quantity of entertainment all focused on one thing, like anti-business, yes, that'll change the culture. But it's when art is anti-business, when art is much deeper and has a much more deeper impact on people. So, yeah, I mean, I think, a movie like Wall Street, which is one of the most anti-business movies ever made, had an impact on the American psyche and American attitude towards business. I think the fact that over 50% of all the murders on television are committed by businessmen has an impact on the way people, over 50%. In real life, it's like nothing, right? Most murders are committed by professional criminals, but that doesn't make good television. You know who commits the fewest murders on television? Anybody want to guess?
Politicians?
No, politicians have, they're not at the bottom, they're not at the top either. No, it's journalists. And lawyers don't commit a lot of murders on television. Lawyers are typically good guys on television, in spite of the fact that in the culture we don't like lawyers. But that's deceptive because on television we love lawyers, right? Think of, when was there ever a television show where the hero was a successful businessman? Like, never?
You know something, there was one movie that David Mamet wrote. I can't remember the name of it. Anthony Hopkins was a businessman. He came out as a hero.
Yes,
forgot.
with what's his name?
With Alec Baldwin, right.
Not Alec Baldwin, was Alec Baldwin in it? But
Yeah,
what's his name? It was
it
with
was,
Brad Pitt. Meet Joe Black.
No, that's not the one I'm talking about.
Meet Joe Black was pretty positive.
No, this one was really positive, and I can't remember the
Okay.
name, and I remember thinking, David Mamet, I thought he was on the left because.
Oh, no, he's gone conservative.
I know, but
Yeah.
this movie came out a long time ago. But
Yeah, no, once in a while, the
Yeah.
positive portrayals of businessmen. I don't know, Batman, for example. And Iron Man. Batman and Iron Man are the only ones that come to mind. And even in Iron Man, he's a flaky, crazy, weird guy, right? So they don't even make him a solid, good businessman. But no, the general portrayal is negative. I used to assign my students an assignment every year. Come up with a movie or a novel where the hero is a successful businessman. And it was very difficult for them. Very difficult. Yeah.
How do you convince schools to teach and middle school and high school?
They lands up that that's very easy. They just like free books and they love teaching Ayn Rand because Ayn Rand is fun to teach. So the worst thing you can do as a teacher is be boring. You don't enjoy it. It's as a teacher, it's not fun. Ayn Rand's not boring. You might hate her, but she's not boring, and the kids love her, right? I mean, what would you rather read, The Fountainhead or Grapes of Wrath? I mean, it's no competition in terms of just the stimulation. I mean, Grapes of Wrath is hard. I mean, it's boring. I mean, it's worth reading, right? But it's boring. So, so I think they sell themselves, I mean, in that sense. And we ship over 400,000 copies of Ayn Rand's books to high school teachers, and they love teaching. And we've got an essay contest. I mean, it's the largest in the country by far because of that. You had a question?
If we had a third party, what would be the best name for it?
The Liberty Party or Freedom Party or the People's Party. I don't know. People's Party sounds too populist, but Freedom Party, I guess. You got a proposal?
What about the Individual Rights Party?
It's good, but it's too many words. Individualism Party. I mean, I love individual rights, obviously, and I think it would capture exactly what it's about, but it's just a matter of marketing, is it the right slogan? Yeah. And it sounds intellectual, that's the other thing, which makes it hard.
You think, I see those stickers and cars, the equal sign, I didn't know for the longest time what they meant, but I think it's gay rights,
Yeah, I
the
know.
blue and yellow, so, I mean, do you think if we did something similar with individual rights?
I don't think there are any shortcuts. I don't think this is a marketing play. So, yeah, I mean, anything you can do to create conversation is good. But I think at the end of the day, this is about deep education. This is about really engaging with people. It's not going to be a slogan or a graphical design that changes people's minds.
Well, I mean, when you're talking at the beginning, there seems to be a conflict where you said, most Americans are principled, and then the politicians, but if the politicians do become principled, then they lose popularity, so they're not incentivized to do so. But on the other hand, people who are principled are confident, and people sense that, so sometimes it's appealing.
Yeah, so I think any way you can project confidence, in your car, on a bumper sticker or whatever, and then have people engage with you because of that is a good thing. Because people want to see role models, and if you can be a role model around you in your workplace or whatever, people come, hey, how come you're so happy, right? I mean, that's why I think the focus should be a positive focus, not grumpy, the world's going to come to an end tomorrow. I don't think that helps us. I think we need to project positive, not optimism, but positive about our own lives, about the values that we're projecting. Okay, we'll take the last two. Yeah.
I came in late, so sorry if I
That's fine.
talked about this earlier, but obviously this whole debt-ceiling debate, you kind of seemingly had this merge of Wall Street and Democrat talking points, and it seemed like the vast majority of economists were just blasting Republicans and all that, and yet there was seemingly no concern about 17 trillion debt. This has been
Well, but that's partially the Republicans' fault, and I mentioned this earlier. It's not the debt ceiling increase which is the problem, it's the debt that's the problem. And if they, for example, the House should have done, so they shut down the government, right? Then the House should have done two things, in my view. Right? They should have passed health care, a new health care bill, a pro-free market health care bill, and said, here, this is the alternative to Obamacare. America, look, this is what we stand for. Choose, right? So they should have gone out on a limb and passed a bill. Not be anti-Obamacare, but here's a pro-free market. We're going to deregulate this, deregulate that, all this stuff. Then they should have gone in and passed a budget, but a budget that actually didn't require raising the debt ceiling, which would require them to cut about $300 billion off of the existing budget, right? Rand Paul actually has such a budget proposal out there. They should have passed that and then said, see, with our budget, you don't have to raise the debt ceiling, right? And then Americans have a choice. But what is the choice the Republicans are presenting them with? You can raise the debt ceiling under Obama, or you can raise the debt ceiling under our budget. But either way, you're going to raise the debt ceiling, right? We want to spend a little less than Obama wants to spend, but we still want to borrow more money. We want to balance the budget in 40 years. He wants to balance the budget in 60 years, as if anybody cares about anything that far out or can predict anything like that. But that's the choices. Even Paul Ryan's budget didn't balance the budget for 20 years. So if you're going to shut down the government, if you're going to make a grand stand, then do it for something, right? Then offer an alternative to the American people. Present them with something that they can choose from, except other than we want to grow government less fast than they do, or we don't want Obamacare, but we're not willing to propose anything alternative because we might piss you off. Which is why I know for a fact, I've heard from Republican senators that they will not propose an alternative because they don't know how to deal with pre-existing conditions, and they think that if they propose an alternative, the American public will turn against them. Well, then they've got a real problem, and they can't win.
Would an alternative be just keep it the way it was before Obama?
No, because the way it was sucks. I mean, there's a reason why millions of Americans are uninsured. There is a reason why healthcare costs are going through the roof, and that's too much government involvement in healthcare. And the distortions that have to do with employer-based healthcare, lack of competition across state lines in insurance, insurance mandates that the states have, and then Medicare, Medicaid, which are huge consumers of healthcare and drive up the cost. Unless you reform all that, the healthcare system in the United States is not healthy. It's not good. It's not. Obamacare passed because Americans don't like what we have today, and justifiably don't like what we have today. It's got real problems. The fixes, you know, at least some of the fixes are pretty easy, but propose it at least. Put it out there, vote for it. But you can't, the status quo is not good. You have to move in the right direction. That's the only thing that will sway the country, is for the Republicans to stand on principle for something positive that is a replacement to Obamacare and replacement to the Obama budget that actually doesn't require the debt ceiling increase, which, you know, they have to pass because their budget requires it as well. So it's not like there's a budget out there that the Republicans have proposed that doesn't require the debt ceiling increase. They all do. So they're hypocrites by not raising it. That's the last one.
I ask you one sort of a personal question. I know you're talking about being positive, that's the way to get to people. But I've heard a lot of people on the right, economists, politicians, they're not as positive as you are just in terms of their demeanor. Is that who you, I mean, underneath the fact that you're talking to us and you're trying to persuade us, you seem to be a very happy person. Is it because of what you saw in Israel that nothing seems to be all that horrible? I mean, what do you attribute that to? Is it just a hereditary thing or the way you were brought up? But you just seem to be a lot calmer about what things are happening and happier about everything? So it's sort of like, you know, Milton Friedman.
Yeah.
You remember listening to him? He would explain the world is falling apart, and he had a sense of humor about it.
Absolutely.
And
Well, I think it's a few things. One is I live my values. So yeah, I'm basically a happy person because I you know, in spite of everything that goes on in the world, you don't live in politics. You don't live in Washington, D.C. You don't live, you know, I make a good living. I pay a lot of taxes. That upsets me. On the other hand, I have enough money. I do fun stuff. I engage with the world. I live my life. There are lots of values you can. I mean, I keep telling objectivists in particular, there are lots of values out there that you can enjoy in spite of what's going on, right? There's great classical music. I can sit on my sofa and on my iPhone, I can choose basically any piece of music ever written in the history of the last 250 years. I mean, just think about it. Wow, that is amazing, right? So there's so much to enjoy that. I mean, if I didn't, then what am I fighting for, right? I'm fighting for my own life, for my own happiness. That's the focus. So I never watch. So here's some tips. Don't watch news. Don't watch television. Don't watch it. Read the news. It's far less emotional. It's far less upsetting. So I read the Wall Street Journal and I read Google News. And I get all my news from Google News. I look at the headlines. I pick the articles I want to read and I read those. So I know I know what's going on in the world because Google News has a nice summary of everything. I never watch Fox. Fox is the most depressing, awful, ridiculous, biased propaganda with the exception of Jonathan Hoenig, right? I can't watch it because I start throwing things at the television. You know, Bill O'Reilly's an idiot and I start throwing stuff and I get upset and and it's emotional. Whereas I can read an article by the New York Times, which is horrible, and I can go, okay, it's the New York Times, what do you expect? CNN, all these things. I never watch news on television because it's too upsetting. And all it is focus on the negative. There's almost no positive. If you're gonna watch, watch CNBC or Fox Business because at least there's a business angle that's positive. But all the other newsy shows, it's all about hysteria and bad stuff, and I don't do it. I mean, I read a lot, and I read a lot of bad stuff. Oh, and I listen to NPR. I love NPR. It's calm, it's intellectual, it's radically biased to the left. I know that. I can correct everything they say. I do it like a correction. You know how in engineering, the bias and you correct? And I love NPR, right? Because they talk about stories you never hear anywhere else. They talk about it in depth. Again, it's biased, but okay, I can deal with bias when it's out front like that. It's, and they claim not to be, which I find funny. I'm going to write a paper once, just taking all the words they use and showing how many times they use certain words and why that bias is they're reporting. So the focus is on, at the end of the day, the focus is on my life, and it's not about the world, and it's not about politics. And, I have a good life. I have a great wife. I have great kids. I mean, life is basically good. The world sucks, but okay. The world can only touch you. There's a line in the Fountainhead, where Howard Roark says it only it's an Atlas Shrugged. It only goes so deep, right? And it should only go so deep. You should have the self-esteem and the enjoyment of your life that fills your life enough that everything out there in the world only goes so deep. Yes, it upsets you. Yes. But okay, but it's not. It doesn't question who you are. It doesn't question your self-esteem. It doesn't go to your soul, and that's what's important. And yeah, I mean, I think coming from a different country, living through hyperinflation, living through a war, growing up in where my dad was at the front, in wartime, and I was at the front once, it's American life in America is pretty sweet, right? I mean. You don't go to air raid shelters ever, right? I do have a different perspective of things. I've lived, I spent days in air raid shelters, knowing my dad was at the front and that bombs might rain on my building. And I think I was the oldest male in the apartment building because everybody else was at the front and everybody else was younger than me. And I was 12 or something. So it gives you some perspective. In that sense, but I don't. But lots of people live that experience and haven't come out like I have. So that doesn't explain it. It just I think broadens it. It gives me a wider perspective on the world and certainly in America. I mean, what an amazing city Chicago is. I mean, it's just fun to walk around the streets, right? I can enjoy just that in spite of the cold. So. It's what a testament to human ingenuity and human success and skyscrapers and architecture and the financial markets down the streets and all this stuff is just, wow, this is fun. This is what America's about. And it's easy to forget that they're bastards in Washington who want to take it all away from us. So you fight them, but you also have to enjoy what's good. And if you can, that's the balance. You don't want to give up the fight because your future and your kids' future and everything depends on it. But at the same time, you want to be able to appreciate the beauty that that we're surrounded by. I mean, going up a skyscraper in Chicago and New York, I mean, and looking out over the city, I mean, wow. I still get immense enjoyment out of that. And I've done it hundreds of times, but it's fantastic. So life's to be enjoyed. The whole focus should be, how can I have fun? Right, in a healthy, positive way, right? Right? And there's still lots of ways to do that. You know, you've got one of the best symphony orchestras in the world here. You've got a great opera house here. Take advantage of it. You know, live it up. You live in one of the great cities in the world. Enjoy it. Thank you.